This is Kevin Conroy, and I am the goddamn Batman.
This is Batgirl, and you're listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
There is nothing wrong with your podcast player. Do not attempt to adjust the volume. Hello and welcome to Studio 2009. I'm, of course, TF2 and Mike. And for this, our latest podcast approach, I've got a person here in the studio that helped me on my journey to starting my own podcasting. I give this person the highest marks of helping me through email back sometime between 2008 to 2010, when email was still a thing. He has recorded and released over 1,500 podcasts. 52 of those were for better or worse, which needs to make a return. Earth 2 may seem like a small-knit family, and it is, but things are always bigger on the inside. This person has gone to the edge of forever and back. He's definitely one of the world's finest podcasters I know. He is Michael David Sims of Earth2.net, the show fame, a website and podcast that will soon be 20 years old in a few years, so there's no drinking here yet. We are going to take Mike through how he listens to podcasts, and how he and the fine people he's collaborated with over the years created the dynasty that is the Earth2.net family of podcasts. Hi, Mike. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing okay, Mike. Thank you. That was awesome.
Yes, this is going to be a Christmas episode, most likely, because your comic origin has to air before this. So this will be coming sometime in December. So there is that. And I wasn't going to put it in the intro, but I tried to go through every 100. And from Star Wars to Batman to Superman to The Crow, TMNT, F4, no, not fantastic, maybe, I don't know, and so much more. You have done so much in nearly 20 years of podcasting. Wow, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
So Mike is here. Mike is back. He's here for the first time on this show, but he's back with me talking about podcasting. And we have 30 questions all about listening to and producing podcasts. When did you discover them, and what was the first one you listened to?
So, I'm not entirely sure where I first heard of this thing called podcasts. It was probably, as you said, I've been doing this a long time. So it was probably on MySpace is where I first heard of them. But wherever I somehow fell backwards into hearing about podcasts, the first ones I would have listened to would have either been Word Balloon by John Suntress, who I think he might still be doing the show. He is an amazing interviewer. He interviews comic book professionals for a living, not for a living, but as part, that's, what his show does. Or it would have been Comic Geek Speak. And last I checked, they're still around as well. And, their interview shows, their comic review shows. And I think, again, I haven't listened to them in a long time, but when I sort of fell off listening to them for no reason other than, time, they were like daily. So they were, they were really pumping them out. So those are really the two earliest ones that I would have been listening to back before I started.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, according to Spotify, he's got 2 episodes he released today as far as Word Balloon Comics podcast.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
He's still going.
Good. Yeah, he is. Like I said, like with Comic Geek Speak, it's been a while since I've listened to him, but I could just listen to him all day because I think he comes from a radio background. So, he's got a professional background and so he knows what he's doing.
Absolutely. How long after you started listening did you want to start your own podcast?
It would have been pretty quickly. Probably just a couple of months, honestly. And it stems from not so much, and sorry if I'm getting ahead of you here, it stems not so much from listening to the podcasts. It's back when I was about like 16, 17, and, you're at that point where you're like, what am I going to do once I hit 18? I'm out of high school. If I'm going to go to college, what am I going to go for? I gave serious consideration to becoming a radio personality. I don't want to say a DJ because I never wanted to be a Howard Stern, man cow type. Hey, this is the morning show. Let's get to the music. Kind of guy. I never wanted that. Nor did I quite want to be a news presenter. But I did want to do something in radio. And for one reason or another that, it doesn't matter. So I won't go into it. That's just not what I went to school for. So I always had that sort of itch to do that. And then, this thing called podcasting came around and I was like, I could do this. So yeah, only a couple of months after I started listening to their shows did I decide that I was going to start Earth2.net, the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I've told you this before. It took me, I don't know, from 2008, so from July or so up until December when I started my first one. So it was only a first few months. And I think I told you initially when I first found World's Finest, I was like, ooh, Bruce and Paul and everybody.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait, no, this is so much better. Not to say anything against those lovely creators that created the content, but, So what was your plan in getting the podcast off the ground?
None. I had none. Literally nothing. I just, I had an old school iPod. I think it was like a Generation 2 iPod. So one of those old white bricky ones, Yep. And I bought a little adapter that snapped into the top that could record audio, and I recorded it on that. And at that point, I already had started Earth2.net, the website. That had been around for
about a year.
Yeah, I want to say about a year, either a year or a year and a half, because I know I started the website in March, but I don't remember if I started in March 2013 or 2014.
You mean 2004?
2004, I'm sorry. But it's been that long, I don't even remember the numbers in front at the end of it. But so I already had the website. So I just was like, well, I'll record this and I'll upload it. And I, figured out how to create an RSS stream, how to post it on iTunes, and do all that. And I was just like, I'll just put it out in the ether and blast it out on the various social medias. And there you go. It was very just, here it is, enjoy kind of situation. There was no plan or anything like that.
See, that's why I spent, a year and a half or whatever it was from 2007 into 2008. And I'm like, I need to create a plan. I need to figure out what this is going, and after by December of 2008 when I started, I think you guys were already maybe up to Superman. Maybe, I don't know, on World's Finest. And I was like, Transformers Generation 1, it's only 98 episodes. It's not a whole, series of, well, Transformers has multiple cartoons, but at least that one cartoon was only 98 episodes. All right, which do you prefer, audio or video podcasting as a fan and as a producer?
Audio. I've never tried video. I appreciate video shows, but just as a listener, if I'm sitting down at my computer, I'm doing other things than not that I'm not watching YouTube or whatever, right? But for me, I just don't have a lot of time for YouTube or video podcasts. So for me, it's just audio because I can listen to them on the go. And sure, you could listen to video ones without the visual content on the go. But for me, it's just audio. It's just where I come from, what I prefer. So yeah.
Yeah, I am the exact same way. I don't mind watching YouTube videos and YouTube reviews where it's 5, 6, 7 minutes, whatever it is. That's fine. A YouTube video to me is completely different from an actual podcast episode. Podcast episodes, as we will discuss later on, are very, very long form, yet most people prefer the short form version of them. But yeah, audio all the way. I can't. When it comes to podcasts, I would much rather marathon audio than video.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely video, like YouTube shows that I do. It's been a while, but that I do watch. But it's one of those things where maybe Sheena's gone to bed. I know I'm going to stay up, and instead of watching a movie or a TV show or something, I'll throw on one of these videos and I'll just sit there. You know what I mean? And just sort of watch that until I get sleepy and I go to bed. But that's pretty much the only time I really do it. Or if I'm like trying to find a video game tutorial, like, oh, that's how you beat that level. Okay,
Yeah, there's video game tutorials on YouTube. Oh Lord, there's one guy I watch, and I don't do I don't do video games anymore. I just don't because of the cerebral palsy. I learned to do it one-handed when I was a kid, but now it's like I'd much rather just watch somebody do a long play of it just so I could see the game, let alone so I watch a bunch of people on YouTube for that.
Yeah.
So when you started, you mentioned your brick of an iPod. What setup did you have initially, and what do you have now?
Initially, it was the iPod with an adapter. That changed within, I want to say, like 3 or 4 episodes. And then I got a Logitech USB microphone that costs like $20 at Best Buy or Target or something. Mm-hmm. And I went through, I wish I could remember the model number so people could look it up because it's the cheapest looking piece of crap. But I went through a ton of those, probably like, I say a ton, it was probably like 3 or 4 of those. Yep. And they were fine mics, whatever. I never really intended my podcasting to be anything professional grade, because back then there was no way to monetize it. There was no Acast. There wasn't people didn't understand what podcasts were, so they didn't understand how you could throw money in it. That did start happening in very niche ways. And I did have sponsorship, for a good while on the show through, DCB service and InStockTrades.com. But when it comes to like bigger sponsors, big money sponsors, I didn't have it, so I didn't care, Mm-hmm. So then I stopped using those, and then you gave me a mic. Mm-hmm. I forget the make and model. You gave me that, and I worked with that one. Sorry, go ahead.
It was the CAD U37 condenser mic.
Yeah. So I used that one for a while, and then I switched over to the one I'm literally recording with right now that I've had maybe 3-4 years at this point, and it's a Yeti Blue. Just with the little sock on top, no pop filter or anything like that. And I just use whatever Skull Candy headphones, and that's it. That's really it. I've played with soundproofing, little boxes you could put around the mic and whatnot. But I record in a room that I'm lucky isn't too echoey or anything like that. So it just sounds fine. I mean, you definitely pick up background noises, you can hear this, that, and the other, but again, I'm not doing this professionally, so it doesn't bother me if people hear that life's going on around me. I mean, to me, that's part of the ambiance of podcasts. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. These people have lives. Some of them might be sitting in a studio doing something, but a lot of them are just sitting in a spare bedroom, or a lot of people in a closet just recording these for our pleasure.
I could not do a closet recording. First of all, at 6'1", almost 400 and something pounds, I don't think I could fit in any of my closets. Second of all, I'm in my living room in my 1-bedroom apartment, which is fine. And you're right, the soundproofing stuff, I'm sure it works, but you need more space. Currently, back in 2010, one of the biggest gifts my mom at the time ever got me was she bought me this 6-foot by 9-foot desk. Yeah, I still have it. It's currently in storage. But this is the ultimate, this is my podcast desk I have, but I don't have it currently. I'm actually currently using my kitchen table. So it is what it is, and we have to adapt and whatever. Yeah, the CAD U37, I actually I've had the same one I've had since 2010 when I upgraded to it, and I upgraded to the JVC. Headphones and I don't understand half these kids out there wearing these earbuds. I can't have anything I don't mind if something's over my ear. I can't do in-ear anything.
Sure.
But I've had the same one ever since, and I've had to replace it a couple of times. The sad thing is, when I've tried to replace it, it sounds like crap. So I just take the the cord, the USB cord from the new one, and just use the same old one I've had since 2010.
Yeah.
So if your headphones or mic breaks down, are you going to buy the same stuff or are you going to upgrade?
I would replace the Yeti Blue. It's been a really good, solid microphone to have. Mm-hmm. If the headphones break down, I don't care about getting Skull Candy again, but I definitely prefer wired over wireless headphones to podcasting, including editing, just because I find them a little more reliable, and you can hear the audio. For me, at least, I can hear the audio breaks a little better with wired than wireless. So I would buy the microphone again. The headphones, I don't care so much about as long as they're wired.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the wireless headphone stuff, and that's great if you're going to be someone who's on the go, who's doing all this gym stuff and exercising and everything else. But sitting here at home, it's like, just plug it into the computer and go.
Yeah.
Question 7 is interesting because I no. But did you think you'd be podcasting for as long as you have?
Yes, actually. From episode 1, no, I didn't even think about it. But once I got the bug for it, I never saw myself stopping. Slowing down, sure, that I definitely have done. You know, there was a point where I think I had 3 or 4 like shows at the time. And right now I technically have 3 shows that I produce and host. There's definitely the one I do with Dan and Dave and Wendy and Will, but that's Dan's show. He produces that. So technically I do a 4th one, but the outside of Earth to the show, which doesn't come out as often as it used to, you know, I have Bigger on the Inside and The Edge of Forever, which you might have alluded to in your intro, which was awesome, by the way. I should have commended you for that. You know, those don't come out as often. There's, you know, the idea was those were going to come out every other week. You know, and now it's like, they come out when they come out, you know. But as much as I still love podcasting, it's just, like I said, slowed down. But yeah, after the bug got me, it's like I don't see myself ever stopping. And, you know, I always see myself doing it in some way or another. I can't necessarily guarantee a schedule, but I can guarantee my voice will be out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were one of, if not the first person that I learned about the whole, because I was always a cartoon kid. I was never like, comics were, they were there.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm 2 years younger than you are. And it's just one of those things where I was a cartoon kid in the 80s and 90s. And yes, watching the 90s Spider. Oh, I'm going to go to Walden Books and check out the comics just to see blah, blah, blah. But when you started doing your previews, I was like, oh, so this is what's coming up. This is what I can look forward to. This is how, you know, and that's how I learned with it. And I remember a long time ago, like you said, things have obviously changed, but I remember a long time ago, at one point or another, you had 7 days of content every week, no matter what it was, whether it was you or whether it was whoever you were, you know, having send in segments. And that was where I got my thing was I was like, okay, we need to have at least one piece of content every day of the week. It doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter if it's my voice or somebody else's. We need to have at least one post every day. So at least that constant content is always there.
Yeah, that was a goal of mine. Once Earth2.net got rolling and podcasts became kind of the central feature of Earth2.net, that was definitely a goal of mine. And I was proud, very proud when that happened. And I was able to maintain that for a while. Now that sort of fell away because life happens. You know, again, we are not professional podcasters. We're not getting paid for it. So I can't say to the host, I'm going to stomp my fist on the desk and say, you must give me your show every Thursday, the first Thursday of the month. And why isn't it here? I can't do that, you know?
No.
But yeah, you know, that's not the way it is anymore. But when that period where that was happening, I was professionally and personally pleased when we were able to do that. Yeah.
I still try to do that, but I usually, when I edit, I go through, and we'll talk about your editing style later, but when I edit, I go through every single second of audio to make sure it sounds the best I can have it sound. And I don't mind sitting here for a whole day to release it the next day, because I know I have something else that I've already worked on that's, you know, whatever. So yeah, you mentioned your goals and all of that in that time and podcasting back then. Like a lot of these people today don't understand that we were still podcasting is make up the rules as you go.
Yeah.
We were making up the rules as we went. We were doing this. We were doing that. There were no. I'm going to say this person's name, even though I don't care about him or his popularity that he's. There were no Rogans. There were no, and I'm just like, radio and podcasting is two completely different worlds. Yes, I think they need to mix formats, but like you were saying earlier, like you're not one of these, drive time at 5. Let's go. Right. Here's your traffic. Like we're not doing that. We're not spending like we spend time to do the things, but we're not like doing a 5-hour shift in the morning. Mm-hmm. So earlier you mentioned your goals. From the time you started to now, how have they changed?
The goals?
Yeah.
As I was saying a moment ago, it was very much, Earth to at the show, specifically, I forget what the original schedule was. It shifted a little, it was like, I'm just saying, I don't think it was, but like it was coming out weekly on Thursdays or whatever. But It got to a point where it was twice a week. One show dropping on a Saturday, the other one dropping on a Tuesday. I don't know why I chose that schedule. I just did. I think that might have been because World's Finest Podcasts was slotted into every other Wednesday. So I think in my brain somewhere it just made sense to do the show on Tuesdays and Saturdays. Again, I don't know how that happened. But, then as much as I enjoy doing that, just energy, time, and age, all sort of came together to conspire to make it that I just can't do them that often. So now, I would love to do one every other week, hell, even once a month, but, sometimes it just doesn't, it just can't happen that way. And I'm speaking specifically of Earth to that at the show. But I'm lucky that I have a ton of contributors that allow me to keep producing episodes of the show. We have the 18th anniversary show that's going to drop as of this recording this Tuesday. And that's all thanks to Ian and his guests on the show. I'm not name checking them because I don't know all the guests and I don't want to screw it. I don't want to name the wrong people. But, I'm very lucky that, I have a rotating cast of guests and co-hosts to help me produce that show. So, but for the goals, it very much was set in stone. It had to be this. It had to be Saturday and Tuesday. It had to be, And now it's just like, just have fun. My goal is just have fun with the people I'm recording with. And that's the goal. That's it.
I mean, that's always been my goal from day one. It's always, have fun with the people you're recording with. As far as the production wise goes, yes, try your best to have, stick to the schedule. Like when I created the pull bag in 2013, New Comic Book Day generally is Wednesday. So that's when that show is supposed to come out. But if I haven't pre-produced it or if I haven't recorded it yet, well, then there's going to be, and after almost a decade of that show turns 10 years old next March, it is what it is. And, you were episode 500 and all that over on that show and everything else. But yeah, I mean, we're old folks. Mm-hmm. We're not, we're not the young podcast spring chickens we used to be.
No.
There's a few feathers loose in the barn over here. Mm-hmm. All right. So listenership, your podcasting, how you as a person were listening, what defines a good podcast for you as a listener?
Every episode, this is a very 1980s Marvel Comics answer, a very Jim Shooter style answer. Okay. Every podcast has to be accessible to a new listener. You can have your in-jokes. You can have, your continuity from episode to episode. Of course you're going to, I don't expect every episode to be a pristine entry point, but it should be accessible. There is a podcast I'm listening to right now. I won't name check it, where I might be dropping it because the in-jokes are so thick that it's, even to someone who's been listening since day one and gets the in-jokes, I'm like, this isn't what I'm here for. I'm not here for your in-jokes. I'm here for the content. I'm here for what you're talking about, not this weird thing about whatever. Again, I'm not even giving you a clue. I'm not going to give any clues what it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have to make it accessible. Whether you're talking about a movie from 40 years ago or a comic book that came out yesterday, or whatever it is, I really think you just have to want new listeners. And by, like, again, having in-jokes and all this and that, you're inadvertently, I was going to say gatekeeping. That's not the right word, but you're putting up a wall around yourself and your show.
Well, you're putting up for in-jokes, you're putting up an expectation that someone who listened to episode 998 is back for 999, and then they are going to sit there and listen for 24 straight hours to 1,000. Which we'll talk about that a little bit later. But that's the problem with too many in-jokes. It's like, have a few, and again, for me with in-jokes, I consider myself a podcast host where I am directing the traffic. I am more of a director than anything else, unless it's something I'm talking about. And whomever's with me, they're the guest or they're the co-host or whatever, and we collaborate. And I co-host with a bunch of people. Like, I don't just want, because my voice is the voice that people always hear. I don't want every episode to always be on specific shows, like the pull bag specifically. I have comics, like I define that show by the comic series that we cover. So I might do, because this is coming out it's not going to hit until this podcast will be out in December of 2022. What I just recently saw as of this recording won't be out until next year, I think. But I just saw the comic trailer for Deadly Neighborhood Spider-Man that's coming out, and I'm like, oh, this looks interesting. What did they do this time? What crazy thing has the Ghost of Stanley made Marvel do this time? Because hello, Deadly Neighborhood Spider-Man. Wouldn't you want to read that just by the title alone, without having to see or know anything about it? So I'll take various Spider-Man series or various comic series, and I've covered all of IDW's TMNT, and I've done that with one person. So I have a cavalcade of people that I use and all of that. And you're right. You have to have something that brings in the new people as well as catering to the old people. And the in-jokes aren't always the best way to do that. Yeah. Yeah. Because, if you assume the same people are listening every week, then you're just going to make an ass of yourself. Right. All right. So as a listener, what does a podcast have to draw you in? So you click play, you listen to like the first 5 minutes maybe, or first minute and a half. What keeps you listening after that first episode that you hear? That is an interesting one, because I haven't tried new shows in a while. I have the ones I listen to, and that's pretty much it. But it has to have, it's going to sound weird because it's because you're like, you press play and why do you stick with it? It's more for me, like, why did I listen in the first place? Okay. But it has to have that topic that I want to hear about, whether it's something geeky related, whether it's something news related or whatnot. If I, sticking with it though, it really has to do what it says on the tin. There was one that Shayna and I had started a couple of weeks ago. It was a news-related podcast, and they advertised it as one thing. And we got maybe like about 5-6 minutes in, and we looked at each other and we're like, this isn't what they billed it as. And we stopped. Yeah. So if you say you're going to be, just as an example, talking about, I don't know, you mentioned the Deadly Neighborhood Spider-Man. You're going to be reviewing the Deadly Neighborhood Spider-Man. Yeah. And it turns out the show is actually why you hate, Batman 66, the movie. What are we doing?
You know,
Yeah.
like, you really have to like say what the show's about and get there. And there could be preamble, there could be stuff afterwards, stuff weaved in and out, or if the show is known for its tangents. Sometimes we can't get through the credits of a movie, the opening credits of a movie without going into tangents. That's fine. But just talk about what you said you were going to be talking about, I guess, is for me what it has to do.
Yeah. And that's the thing. We're currently in 2022, almost 2023. Let's just say for you and I, podcasting has been around since 2005 and 2008, respectively. I mean, yes, I listened to before I started producing, but like, it's almost been 20 years since we first discovered this new form of audio content. And unless you're a show that, you know, you're a general, like we have Geekcast Radio, we have this show here, Studio 2009. Steve and I created this in 2020 because at the initial outset of the network back in 2009, we had a movie show, which was all about movies. We eventually had the comic show that I've taken. We've got the cartoon show where we talk about so we've taken these various things like films, comics, and animation and put them in. And by 2020, we're like, can we just have one show where we and the goal of this podcast is to talk about anything we want to in the audio or visual realm. It doesn't matter if it's, you know, an old school record of whatever Star Trek play you decide to put on or whatever it is if it's audio or video, we'll cover it at some point. And I have no set schedule for this. It's just like, whatever we feel like talking about or whatever anniversary is coming up or whatever. But we stick with, like, I don't specifically put comic book stuff here because obviously I have the pull bag and that's whole other bag of tricks, but like we could talk about a comic book trailer, we could talk about a comic book movie trailer or whatever, because it's in the visual audio and visual realm kind of thing. So yeah, you don't want to sit there and sit like you were saying, let's talk about this new, you know, let's give our impressions of this new Deadly Neighborhood Spider-Man, but wait, we're gonna, you know, Adam West you and talk about the fact that years ago DC decided to go dark and put Batman's dick on the cover of a comic or so. No, don't do that. Yeah. This is going to get into your producing a little bit, but as a listener, do you prefer short 30 minutes to an hour and 30-minute shows, or do you prefer longer podcast episodes as in 2 hours, 3 hours, 10 hours, or more?
Yes. You know what? It depends on what I'm listening to, honestly. I don't want to get ahead of us here and, you know, but yeah, some of the shows I listen to are it's weird to say they straddle the line between amateur and professionally produced. So some of them are like, this episode really has to only be 35 minutes at a push or at a max, because there's someone else waiting to use the studio in their offices. So they know this topic, they have to get in, talk about it and get out, you know, and I appreciate that. But those same people will then also sometimes do like an hour and a half long like weekend recap of what was going on in the week in that particular topic. Sometimes it's longer because they're doing their version of like a DVD audio style commentary. And those can then be 2.5, 3 hours long, you know? So I like the short ones because I could listen to them on my commute, you know, and I like the long ones because that allows me to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to do the dishes and I can listen to 20 minutes while I'm doing that. I can pause it, walk away. Hey, I'm doing the laundry now. I can press play and pick back up where I left off. And so I like the long form ones for that reason, because the ones I listen to definitely allow you to start and stop, you know? Yeah. And it's by virtue of the topic, you can, or the topics, you can just sort of do that. So, but I save the longer ones for the weekend, not for the week. Cool. I will say though, I just started a new job. The area, now it's not quite an office. It's not quite a cubicle that I'm working in, was like, it looked like a tornado went through there. So I've spent a good part of the week cleaning it up. And that's allowed me uncharacteristically to listen to some of the longer ones at work Where again, normally I save those for the weekend. So it's not a simple yes and no with me. I love the form so much that I appreciate that people can do, hey, here's a 30-minute episode about X, Y, and Z. And here's a 3-hour episode about that same topic or something else.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. It's so funny that, it just depends, what you're doing and what you're, trying to do. Like we've already said, for you and I, I'm never going to sit here and say a podcast is background noise, but we put it on and then we can listen to and pay attention to it while we are also paying attention to something else or, like you said, doing chores or doing this or doing that. And it's just the way it is.
Yeah.
As a listener, do you start at the beginning of a podcast, the most recent episode, or do you jump around?
I jump around, and I look for episodes that I might be interested in. There's a wrestling promotion that's been around for about 3 years now called AEW. And they have a podcast, I think it's called AEW Unrestricted. Is that what it's called? And it's hosted by Aubrey Edwards, one of their referees, and Tony Schiavone, one of their commentators. And, they bring various wrestlers in to interview. And I don't listen to every episode, but I will go, oh, they're going to talk to this wrestler. I like that wrestler. Let me give that one a shot. Or, hey, I've wanted to get into that wrestler, though I've never seen any of their matches. I'll listen to that one. But there's some where I'm just like, nah, I don't need to hear that particular episode. Or if I'm finding like a new movie review show, I'll go, oh, they're going to talk about this movie. I'll download that one, whether it's their newest episode or one from a year ago in their archives. It's very rare that I will go back and start with episode 1, or in some cases, like an episode 0 or something like that. The only times I would do that is if I was trying to follow along with a show. There was a podcast called Podcast Horseman, which followed along with BoJack Horseman, which I had just before the pandemic started, I started getting into BoJack Horseman, and the podcast started. So I started, let's say, in like November 2019, watching that show. The podcast started, I think, in like January or February. So I did start on the ground floor with that one to listen along. But had I found it after the podcast had been going for a while, that's when I would have started with episode 1 to go, oh, well, I'm watching this show, or so I want to hear their thoughts from start to finish. So it really depends on the content and what my aims are as a listener.
Yeah, there's a show there. They haven't produced anything in a little while, but there was a show that started, I think, 2019, somewhere around there, maybe 2018, I forget. It's called Part-Time Nerds, Full-Time Dads, and it's from a buddy of mine, Mike Laidman, who I had listened to on other shows before, and I was like, oh, well, part of their initial journey with he and his friend Chris, they're both married. Chris has kids, Mike, and at the time his wife Laura, they were about to have a kid, and they went through this whole journey of, telling everybody about the pregnancy and about the birth. And so it was kind of like, oh, you kind of have to follow along. So I generally will go, start at the beginning just to get the initial, like what hosts want the show to be. And then you're right. Most of the time I end up skipping around.
Yeah.
To find the topic that I want to listen to or whatever.
Just along those lines, I name checked it, Podcast Horseman, because that one started just before COVID-19 disrupted the world. Yeah. That show winds up becoming sort of an audio journal of the hosts. And I say this this isn't meant to be a joke, sort of like the decline of their mental state. Because, and it's interesting doing it with a show like BoJack Horseman, which I don't know if you've watched at all.
I haven't.
Yeah, you haven't. It's a hard watch. That show is like, you can't, if you binge watch that show, be very careful about your mental health, because they go into some very deep, dark, disturbing places. Just because it's a cartoon doesn't mean it's all, fun and games. Of course, we know animation doesn't have to be. But anyway, so they're covering that. And, everybody's like, okay, we'll be locked down a couple of weeks. Okay, it's a couple of months. Oh shit, we're a year in. Sorry for cussing.
No, it's okay.
so if you do start from the beginning, it's like pre-COVID, and they're like, oh man, we can't wait to talk about this show. And now you're like halfway through the season or the series, and they're just like, what is going on with the world?
Exactly.
It's fascinating. That was not the intent of the show, but it became almost the thesis of the show because
sometimes with the content that you're like, you look at something like The Blacklist or Breaking Bad. Oh God, I had such a hard time with The first time I watched that, I was like, because I am very, very straight edge. I have drank alcohol in the past. I've never smoked. I don't do drugs or anything like that. So, like a show about a guy needing to make meth, not exactly my thing, but I eventually came back around to it and I watched it again. But that show is like really freaking hard and deep and whatever. And, like you were saying with COVID happening, there's things, man. It's just, if you're doing a podcast at any length of time and something happens in real life, that's then becomes a part of the podcast if you want it to become a part of it. Like, that's the whole thing. Like when you would make certain announcements or do certain things in order to do the show, it's like, look, life is happening. An episode may be late, or this may be happening, or this is, I want to be as honest and as open with the audience as I can be. And that's, just the way, from what I remember you always doing. And that's pretty much the way I've always done it too, where it's like, look, this happened and there's nothing I can do about it and whatever else. And this is what we're going through. And this is where, it's just the way it is. I mean, you can't just like, part of this show, what we've done, what I've tried to do is, because we started it in 2020 right as the pandemic was starting, I figured, let's do like we did episode 3, we did our top 10 favorite Batman actors. So Steve and I counted down, and it didn't matter if it was live action or voice acting, because let's face it, I mean, Kevin Conroy is always going to be number one. I mean, come on, but like, I wanted to create an escape for people, kind of thing. So that's kind of where all that started and whatever else. But yeah, you're right. I mean, what's the point of having an audience and being a host to a podcast where you can't sometimes Ferris Bueller the hell out of this shit and say, hey, look, this is going on, kind of thing. Right. And just, man, that and podcasting is all about journeys. You yourself have been on, from episode 1 of Earth2.net to episode 1126. A lot has changed in nearly 20 years for you. Yeah. So, that's why I love this medium so much with the audio, because you can definitely I feel closer to a lot of the podcasters and podcasts that I've listened to than I have ever felt with. There's maybe 2 or 3 radio programs in my lifetime that I have actually felt close to those people, because I've actually either met or connected with those people in some way or another. The rest of it, it's like, they're just talking. Just play the music, please. Just play the music.
Yeah, and I mean that's the thing with, I keep saying, we're citizen podcasters or whatever, we're I don't consider myself a professional. I'm not going to name check who you name checked earlier. A certain Mr. Name rhymes with Hogan.
Yeah. Like, please don't insult Hulk like that. Please, come on.
Yeah, sure. He's a bit problematic, so I think I will insult him. But
no.
Oh yeah, he's very problematic. But anyways, the point is, and I don't know if I can technically consider him a professional podcaster, anyways, because he. Whatever. I won't go into it. The point is, what I'm getting at is, because we're just, people sitting down with microphones on our desks, in our kitchen, in our spare rooms, in a closet, wherever, you do kind of wind up fostering a relationship with the audience, even if you never interact with them or vice versa.
Yep.
You might interact with them on social medias or a chat forum or wherever, just in the wild. Sometimes it happens. I know, Dan had told me he's ran into, I know it happened at least once, but, Dan was like, someone heard his voice and was like, wait, are you, it's like, oh yeah. So it happens, but you foster this relationship. So it's easy to be open about your life experiences, where if you're doing it as a paid gig, as part of your job, like let's say it's an extension of like a TV show you're doing, right? Like if you're an actual news presenter and here's this, you're going to keep a certain level of distance from the audience. You're going to power through for 30, 60, 90 minutes, however long, whatever's going on in your life. You can turn that off. And then once it's over, you can go back to whatever you were doing, where with our kind of podcast, you don't have to do that. You can be open with the audience, So you do see these life journeys, and it winds up being an unintentional journal of our lives, whether you do it for just a few months or for as long as I have, this is an audio record of, if I'm 44 and I've been doing this 18 years, what's that mean? I started when I was 26. Is that the math?
26, 27, somewhere around there.
Yeah, that's crazy. But I'm not the same person I was at 26 that I am at 44. I'm completely different. And if you do dare to listen from episode 1, don't, to up through 1100 plus as we are now, you're gonna hear a completely different guy than that person that was recording on an iPod with a little adapter trying to whisper through an intro so I didn't disturb my girlfriend at the time in the other room, So, yeah.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, here's some inside baseball for you. I'm the fan. He's the creator. Like literally, I am not worthy. I am not worthy. Get up. You're worthy. It's okay. But it's one of those things where, and I'm glad he mentioned it, because I was going to say, well, when you create a podcast where you're whispering like this, it's like, yeah. But I mean, you know what? Look, like you said, it's an audio record of your life. We are essentially creating without which I find, because I'm more of a machine than anybody else that I know. So I have, as of 2018, I know I had 2011 podcasts produced, recorded, and released. As of 2018, from 2019 to now, I didn't do a lot in 2020 because my computer was in storage and all of that and everything else. But I did I would say, the way I've always approached it, and this is just for you because you're here and you're doing this, I start January 1st and I do my damnedest to work up to Halloween. Once Halloween starts, okay, it's holidays and Thanksgiving's coming. I'm going to slow down. I'm going to cut back. And if I can produce in those 10 months anywhere from 100 to 200 to 300 podcasts per year, I'm going to do it because I don't have a day job. I can't, because of the disabilities and the mental stuff that I had. Like literally in 2019, I went through brain surgery because there was excess fluid on my brain. Like I didn't and finding out that I never actually was never born. I don't have it's a corpus callosum. So it's the thing in the back of your brain that basically divides the left and the right hemispheres. So instead of having two small wading pools where the spinal fluid and all that, I have just one giant lake of spinal fluid and all of that excess and everything else. So it's like I don't function like normal people function. So I don't have, this is my quote unquote job. And yeah, you're right. I don't technically get paid to make my own content. Not that I would ever expect to, but I've made friends and whatever, and I've gotten listeners and people have donated to me over the years. And like, I just had to fund a cross-country trip to change my entire life, and I didn't have the money to do it. And luckily, so many generous people came out. And so, no, man, it's like podcasting is all about making the connections and making the friends that you can, and it's not about the celebrity aspect of it.
Yeah.
It not for us. Like, we're not insert whatever hack you want to insert here that is not us.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
And I'm just so appreciative of all of it. And the last episode that you were on over on the pullback, it's like, yeah, I've been trying to get you to do this for 14 years, but this episode specifically here on Studio 2009, it's like, hey, you did this. Let's talk about this, because 20 years, almost, like you said, 18 years is impressive, close to 20. As a listener, how many hosts are too many on one episode?
That's a great question. That comes down to how well the host can wrangle them. For me personally, I prefer hosting ones that are 3. I can do 4, but if you go above 4, you start accidentally inviting cross chatter, because it just happens,
Yeah.
And as an editor, that's like, if everybody's not on their own track, which can sometimes happen, based on your recording software, whatever, it just becomes a bear, As a listener, I kind of am there as well. 3, 4 at a push, 5's okay, but you really have to be able to manage them. I mentioned it earlier, the show that Dan produces with Wendy, Dave, Will, and myself. There's 5 of us, and I should name check it. It's Channel 37's Midnight Movie Show. It's a great, fun podcast. Like I said, there's 5 of us, and Dan does a wonderful job, an amazing job, as a host, making sure we're not talking over each other, that everybody has their say, they get their word in, and then he moves on to the next person. So it really comes down to you, not you, Mike, but you out there as a host. So yeah, 3 to 5. Anything more than that, even with a very deft host, you're inviting trouble.
Yeah. If you have more than 6 people on, you might as well just be Howard Stern doing stupid things.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So when do you stop listening to a podcast altogether? When you've been listening for a while and then something happens and you're like, nope, done, bye.
I kind of mentioned earlier, there's a show I'm on the brink of maybe stopping listening to, because even as someone who's listened since episode 1, the content is becoming impenetrable. But more often than not, I don't make a hard cut on a show. It's more that time will just wind up dictating that I don't have the time to listen to it anymore. And it just sort of fades away. And maybe I'll go back and try to play catch up, or I'll just go, okay, I'll just sort of restart with whatever their most recent episode or episodes were. So yeah, it really is just like, look, I've only got so many hours in the day, and sorry, your podcast, I just can't make time for it anymore. And it could still be a great show. It could still be one I really want to listen to, but I just can't do it, Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. It just depends on what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I groan every time, and I don't know why editors can't edit it out. And people say that, oh, it's filler words, it's this, but present company excluded. Anytime anyone says, and I say this every episode I record, I don't care what show it is, it takes 10 seconds to edit out, but it is what it is, and that's how people talk, and I don't know. But yeah, I don't really have a hard, like you said, there is no hard stop thing. Like, it's more of, that's the other thing, it's kind of bridging the listener to producer thing. It's like, when you're a listener, you can listen, even though you may not listen to everything or every single podcast, because not even I could listen to every podcast that's out there. Not that I have any interest to, but I don't need to be in the Guinness Book of World Records for podcasting, folks.
Yeah.
Look, not for listening. Producing, maybe, not for listening. But it's one of those things where I just don't, once I got into the production, it's like, I can go back. I actually have a folder where I think there's like 20 or so emails between you and I over the years. And it's like, oh, I know exactly when I almost stopped listening, because in 2011 we started doing bigger things with the network and everything else. And it's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'll catch up in 10 more years.
Yeah.
So what podcasts are you currently listening to, and what would you recommend for our listeners?
Right now, the main ones I'm listening to are, of course, the shows on earth2.net. I won't name check them specifically for, favoritism. But right now, my primary podcast listening is dedicated to wrestling podcasts. Mm-hmm. So I will listen to the podcasts from What Culture and What Culture Wrestling, or is it WWE? I forget. I think they changed their name. So What Culture Wrestling's brand of podcasts, along with Cultaholics podcasts. Those are pretty much my daily go-to. Like I said, I'm commuting, walking around, doing the dishes kind of shows. Right. But then at night, what happens is when Shayna and I are finished having dinner and we're cleaning up, we're doing the dishes, we're getting ready for bed, we throw on news adjacent podcasts, political podcasts. So we'll do shows like In the Bubble. We'll do Beg to Differ, trying to think of some of the other ones, The Bulwark, just because, we try to stay on top of the news as best we can. And these are people that have been in the news of the political sphere for years, if not decades of their lives. And they are doing it professionally. So it is very clean. It's very well produced. So we listen to those so we can just stay on top of what's going on in the world, usually more in U.S. politics, but sometimes the world politics come up. So that's sort of where I am right now. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Yeah, because I'm online so much, I see all the various, most, not impressive, the most relevant news stories from whatever news channel I follow. It's oh, that's the news, or, oh, that's this news, or, oh my God, this happened, or, I don't think I could listen to, I just don't think I'm not that politically inclined to do, not saying it's not entertainment, but for me, podcasting is an escape. And
yes,
and I understand and I respect how you do it, but why would I because I'm not that isn't in my brain. It's oh, that's the wrong Escape to LA. That's the remake. No.
Right. Yeah.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. You're going to hear some ads. That's 15 out of the 30 questions so far. Like I said, you're going to hear some ads and some other stuff, and we'll be back with Mike from Earth2.net, the show, right after this.
Hello, geeks and geekettes! Looking for a podcast that covers a vast array of topics? Then check out Altered Geek Unleashed, where we discuss our thoughts on this week's geeky news, tech, gaming, television shows, movies, cartoons, comics, and more. So, get altered, get geeky with the Altered Geeks. Every Friday on the Geekcast Radio Network.
Because the world needs another movie podcast.
The Geekcast Radio Network presents for your listening pleasure the Cinema Geek.
Hosted by Amanda, Kevin, Matt, and Dan.
Each week we dive headfirst in the landscape of movies as we discuss movie news, play movie games,
go in-depth on reviews,
and even have a top 10 countdown or two.
Also, don't miss our director retrospective series, where we review noted directors' movies film by film. Bottom line is, if you love movies and love podcasts, you need to experience the Cinema Geeks.
You can find us on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, or GeekCastRadio.com.
Like science fiction? Of course you do, or you wouldn't be listening to the Geekcast Radio Network. Well, the Mark Who 42's Universe podcast is an award-winning sci-fi radio show that's been around for over 10 years. We cover everything from Doctor Who to the MCU to pop culture and everything in between. A new show drops on Tuesday mornings on the GCRN website and all of the major podcast platforms. So listen to the Mark Who 42's Universe podcast from the universe and beyond.
Hi, I'm Terry Smith, the host of Music Talks, the podcast where I ask guests a simple but beguiling question. Choose a song from each decade of your life and tell me why these songs mean so much to you. Guests and listeners love this format, and if you want to find out why, then take a listen at musictalkspod.buzzsprout.com or use your favourite podcast app. Just search on Music Talks Terry Smith. If you'd like to be a guest on the show and then send me a tweet at Music Talks Pod. I look forward to doing some music talking soon.
All right, we are back here inside Studio 2009. It is now time to talk about podcast production. As a producer, do you find yourself listening to podcasts less and less?
No. I found myself listening more to other shows, really just to see what was out there, and maybe to see what I could learn from them.
Yeah, I find that I have equal amounts of time for the production that I do compared to, like, in the beginning when I first started, like back in like 2010, 2011, when we were really ramping up. But now it's like I have, because I don't do anything else, I have 24 hours in a day. So it's like, oh, yep, 24 hours. That's, yeah, Marvel countdown. Got it. It actually took me 2 days for the Marvel countdown. I forget what episode number that was, but the 2 parts, the 5-hour Marvel film countdown you guys did. I don't remember. It was you and Donovan and somebody else. It was on Earth too. I forget which episode it was.
Yeah.
And you've kind of talked about this already in the beginning, there was no plan, but as a producer, are you a podcast planner or are you throwing stuff at the mic to see what sticks? Don't throw stuff at me, please.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a show like World's Finest Podcast where we have to say this is what we're covering, or a Bigger on the Inside where it's like, we're doing all of Doctor Who or The Edge of Forever, all of Star Trek, there's definitely a plan there. But when it comes to like Earth2.net, the show, it's just like whatever the hell we feel like talking about that episode. Yeah. So yeah, there's really very little planning that goes in. It's like, do you want to talk about this? Yeah, sure. Okay, let's do it. When do you want to do it? That's great. Let's do it. Hit record and go.
Yep. Yeah, and the funny thing is, so we do, my buddy Steve, who is the main person who helped me get into all this outside of you, and I have other influences, but Steve pretty much runs the website and does all the stuff that he's essentially my version of you. And he has his show Altered Geek, and podcasters are not news reporters. We've kind of talked about this already, but we don't report the news. We are news reactors. We give opinions on new, I know, again, even though this will be released later, as of this recording, Black Adam is in theaters, and oh my God, The Rock, and oh this, and oh, the audience score versus the critics score. It's like, oh God, audience versus critics. Can we please stop that? But yeah, I mean, we are reactors to various things and things like that. But yeah, with the planning, it's like, unless you have, like you said, unless it is one specific thing, it's like there's somewhat of a plan, but it's like, hey, what do you want to do this week? Oh, okay, let's do that then. So, all right, now for you, this is going to be interesting. As a producer, are you a one-man show kind of host, or do you prefer working with co-hosts?
Oh, I prefer working with co-hosts. I hate recording alone. I really do. I mean, if you go through the Earth2.net, the show archives, there are some I've done solo, and I absolutely hated recording those. I take that back. I shouldn't say hate, because it depends. If it's ones like where I was going through the previews catalog, that's one thing, because I'm just reading copy, setting it aside, making my comments, and that's fine. But when it comes to like reviewing comics or a movie by myself, I don't like it, because I ain't got no one to play off of. And that's what I want. I don't want my opinion to be the end all be all on the topic. Not that it's, everybody, they're going to watch that movie or read that book and go, oh, no, I agree or I disagree or not even remember what I said. I don't care. But just for that episode is what I mean. It's like, I want someone that is going to counter what I'm saying. They're going to add their own piece, and it's so much easier for me. Yeah. So doing it by myself I'll do it, but I really struggle with it.
Yeah, all as I can think of, and I know you'll remember this, but the radio announcer before Robin Williams comes into Good Morning Vietnam, where he's like, today in Saigon, the weather is going to be 50 miles out of the, the wind is going to be 50 miles out of the, and I was, that's what I was like when I first started. And I'm like, no, I need somebody to bounce off of.
Yeah.
It's just easier that way.
Now, as a listener, I know you asked me as a producer, but as a listener, I don't mind one-person shows. I want to make that clear. But as a producer, it's completely different. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as a listener, it depends on if the person can, like you said, like when you're doing your, the previews episodes that do you still do them or did you stop?
No, I stopped because of basically I changed a lot of what I did once I started the Patreon feed.
Okay.
So I stopped doing the previews episodes and I stopped doing the audiobook episodes because I didn't think it was fair to the patrons to put up content that I didn't. Yeah, I'm recording in my own voice the previews, but I'm just reading copy that somebody at Marvel, DC, Image, or wherever wrote.
Yeah.
And, I might be adding my input, but I just didn't think it was fair for the patrons. So I just sort of cut those ones out.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, but, when I was listening to you doing those, it's like, oh, I should write this down, or I should write or I should mark that off, or I should tell my comic shop to order, it's like, and you did a really good job of it. And there are a number of hosts that I've liked over the years that are one-man shows, but maybe they'll eventually get co-hosts or whatever else. But yeah, it's always fun with at least one other person.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did you go about finding your co-hosts?
Dear God, I don't even know. Okay. So starting with James Doe for World's Finest Podcast, we knew each other through a wrestling forum called The Oratory. In fact, a number of the oldest, I didn't mean it in terms of age, but in terms of contributors, so in terms of the oldest contributors to Earth2.net and Earth2.net the show and the forums too, we all came from the Oratory, the wrestling forum. So, I saw what the Oratory was doing. I'm like, oh, I like this. Let me do it for comics and just geeky stuff. So I created the forums and the website. And those people just became the earliest hosts because I knew them. I had known them for maybe a year or so at that point through there. So when it comes to then Des, who was one of my earliest co-hosts, I honestly don't remember how that came about. I don't remember if I was looking for contributors and he reached out as a writer. And then we started podcasting together. I genuinely don't know. I do know when it comes to Dan, he was writing for the site already. I have maybe a couple of months. He had done a couple of things, maybe more than a couple at that point. And there was an episode of, I want to say it was, Is It Wednesday Yet? But it might have been Waiting for the Trade. But I can't remember which one it was, where Des couldn't make it. And this is back when the show, I was very much it has to come out every Tuesday or whatever. So I needed someone to sit in for him. And I just kind of put the call out there and Dan raised his hand and was like, hey, I'll do it. And I was like, oh yeah, I love your writing. This is great. We already knew each other, and the history from there. I think round about this time next year, Dan and I will have been podcasting for 15 years together.
That's awesome. That's great.
What? What? How? How did this happen? So yeah, that's really what it is. It's most of the people, were either contributors already to the site or were part of the forum. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny when you brought Dan on, I'm like, oh, it's home now because I used to be able to park the car in Harvard Yard, I was born in Stoughton, Massachusetts. Right. I lived the first 13 years of my life. And I'm just like, ooh, Boston Dan, I like this. And it was so funny back over on the pull bag when my ultimate goal of getting you for episode 500 was, if I can convince Des to do episode 401 and tell his comic book story, if I get Des first, I know I can get Mike after that. It's get your hooks into one, get your hooks into the other. And with Des, and this is just so silly and stupid, and I don't even think the post is there anymore, but I made a post somewhere on the forums about Nickelback, and I'm an unabashed Nickelback, unapologetic Nickelback fan, and he had said something about, yeah, I only like seeing the backs of their heads so I can kick them, because he had some real-life encounter with Jack Kroger, and I was like, whatever, but like I love talking to Des in episode 401 of the pull bag. It was so fun. Like he was talking about Savage Dragon and everything else and all the stuff he liked. And so yeah, here's hoping Dan's the next guest on the pull bag. But yeah, I mean, you just you find people that like I said earlier, you say, hey, are you interested in this, or would you like to do this? And then you obviously have to test and make sure you each have chemistry with each other, and that was what one of the things that was so great about World's Finest podcast is you and James each approached it from a different aspect and everything else, and it was just so fun how eventually your camaraderie came together, whether it was in continuity or not. And sorry, there's a certain show on that podcast that is not in continuity. If it comes before Batman, then how could it be in continuity? I know. As a producer, do you feel you need a mixing board and all the fancy stuff that would essentially be found on a radio station, or are you just good with a great mic and headphone setup?
Mic and headphone setup. I've contemplated the whole mixer thing, and for me, I don't need it. If I was doing in-person podcasting, more than two people in a room, sure, I would definitely consider it. But, you had mentioned, for better or worse, the show that my wife and I did, and, we just put the mic in front of us, and that was fine, just between us. But yeah, if you're going to do more than that, then you definitely need a mixer. But yeah, if you want to add sound effects and audio clips and all that, then yeah, go for it. Get one. It would be a very valuable tool. But for me, any sounds or clips, I just add them in post while I'm editing.
Same here. Yeah.
So I don't need that in front of me.
Yep, absolutely. So how much time do you put into the editing of the shows?
Okay, this has changed over the years.
Mm-hmm.
I used to edit every and out to the best of my ability. I used to shrink longer pauses down for fear of people thinking there was dead air and that back in the day, their iPod, now their phone, had died. I don't want someone the pause to be so long that they can pull their device out of their pocket to look if it's still playing, So that said, I would definitely take an episode, double or triple its length. And that's how much time I would put into editing. And I used to have the stamina to do that in one sitting. I would literally record an episode. And so let's say an hour long episode, just for easy math, and grab the files and go, okay, I've already sat here for an hour and I'm going to do another 2 to 3 just to get this done. And then I can move on with the rest of my day. Now I'm not so strict with my rules. I leave the ums and uhs in. I still cut them out. I do my best to cut out coughs and things like that. I still do shrink those quiet moments, those quote unquote dead air moments, but not as much as I did, because sometimes they're there for effect. You know what I mean? So I will leave those in. So it's definitely changed. Also, how I edit has changed greatly. The way I used to do it, like in the early days of the show, maybe up through episode 200, as I was recording, I would have a sheet of paper in front of me and I would jot down the times that needed an edit. Okay. But the problem is, let's say you mark an edit just again for easy math, at minute 1, minute 5, and then minute 10. And you make that edit at minute 1. Now the edit at minute 5 is now maybe at minute 4:30 and not minute 5 and at the 5-minute mark. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Because you're shrinking the track. So what I did was I edited backwards. So I had my list of edits and I would say, okay, the very last edit, that at least while recording, that I wanted to make was at the 1 hour mark. I'd start with that one, because then that doesn't change the time structure working backwards. Do you see what I'm saying? So I used to do that, but then it got to the point where if I was recording with someone in person, it got to be kind of, I realized it was kind of rude because they're seeing me write down while they're talking, and they're realizing that I'm going to edit something out that they're literally saying in that moment. You know what I mean? And also, I was just like, well, no, it just became too much work, and maybe I was missing something too, and I wasn't 100%, maybe just 95% engaged in the editing, if that makes sense. You know, or not the editing, in the recording part.
In the recording,
so, yeah, so I stopped doing that, and now I just listen from start to finish and just go. But like I said, so now instead of it being double the length of the show, maybe it's like the length of the show plus half.
Yeah. So for me, I've never, like, I will make edit points. Like, I will, like, if something happens where somebody knocks on my door, I will say something like, and this is not currently happening, folks, this is an example, but I will say, okay, hang on, 1 hour, 16 minutes, and 34, edit. I'll stop. I'll go take care of whatever. I will come back. The thing for me with editing is I always used to be a super stickler of, we need to record on Skype. It needs to be on one track. I do not know how to do multi-track it, and I've learned over the years, and I now know how to do. So for me, how I do it now is I will take a whole day, let's say from 7 a.m. to 5, basically work hours, okay? General business hours. Let's say from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. I will take a whole day. I will listen to every part of each of our tracks. I will cut out what I feel needs to be cut out. I will cut around the breaks. I will do that. I will then level each track. I will then combine them into one track for the, like you mentioned earlier, about inserting clips. I'm all about inserting clips. I always have been, except nowadays it's much easier once I get what we're currently doing into a one-track file. But now that I'm on this journey of doing multi-track editing, it's like, oh, okay, this is easy. And like you said earlier about the hosts and how many, you have, and it's like, okay, just make sure no one's talking over each other. Right. And then everything else is kind of gravy kind of thing.
Yeah.
As a producer, do you prefer in-person recordings or over-the-internet recordings, Skype, Zencastr, Zoom, etc.?
By nature of just how it's worked out, over the internet, honestly.
Yeah.
If I'm recording in person with someone, it's, like my wife,
Yep.
I've done like Dan came into town, I want to say was it Bigger on the Inside 100? I forget. I think that was the number where we just sat down and recorded like all day, you know. And there was an early episode of Earth to Net at the show where Des was in town for like Chicago Comic-Con or Wizard World Chicago, whatever it was called at the time, and just sat down with him for a little bit. But yeah, just by the nature of having contributors literally all over the world, it just works out that it's Zoom. And that works for me better because I have anxiety and I can hide it better when I'm recording over Zoom and I'm not in the room with someone and just being nervous and physically interacting with them on top of with my voice. So, yeah.
Outside of when Karen was still alive, and she wasn't, I've only ever put this in, I think, one episode, but I have various things that I recorded with her, and I tried to get us to do a podcast, and not just like not like what you and Shayna did with For Better or Worse, but like just, something, an episode of this, or, I have audio of us doing stuff, but it's not like anything, whatever. But at least, that's us. We can look at each other. We can look at the mic. We can do whatever. I've only ever done 2 other in-person recordings. My buddy Steve, best friend, co-creator of the network, and all that stuff with me. He came into town for when Karen and I got married, and I'm just like, okay, this is the first time, like, that was 2017. We met online in 2008. So almost a decade of us knowing each other online only. It's like, okay, how can we not record at least 30 minutes of a show together in person? So we did that, and it was weird because it's like, okay, do we look at each other or do we look at the microphone? Because for me, it's like you said, you're right. You put, you are in your space, I'm in my space. I have we each have, like, we're in our own environments, but we are now magically connected through the internet dust or whatever the hell the internet is these days, kind of thing. and I did one other one. I did an interview with Big Ed from Big Ed's Barbecue up there in Waukegan, Illinois, and that was fun. Big Ed's hilarious. If you ever get up to the north side of Illinois up there, go check out Big Ed's Barbecue. You may not be a barbecue person, but just he's hilarious. He's so fun. So yeah, I much like you prefer the over the internet thing. It's much easier, and it don't have to worry about looking at the actual people. You can just look at your screen.
Yeah.
As both a listener and a producer, do you prefer one feed, have everything, and should each type of show have its own feed?
I think each show should have its own feed. Mm-hmm. That said, I do have a catch-all feed called Earth2.net Presents that's up in iTunes, in various places. But yeah, I prefer to keep them separate because I don't want to bog down people's podcast app. If they just want to listen to Earth2.net, the show, they can do that without having Bigger on the Inside drop on them, and then they're going to go, oh, okay, it's another of Mike's shows. That's great. But I don't want them to have to go through the energy of, removing it or after it downloads or whatever. So I think for me, I like keeping them separate for the listener.
Yeah. And I agree to the point where, yes, you were created, like you said, with World's Finest Podcast, with For Better or Worse, they're two completely Bigger on the Inside. They're all completely edge of forever. One's Star Trek, one's Doctor Who, one is superheroes with the DC Animated Universe, and the other is all about movies and TV and whatever else. So, yeah, they should all be their own thing. At the same time, I have stopped creating new shows. Because this show, specifically Studio 2009, as I mentioned a while ago in this episode, anything in the audio and visual realm. So whatever it is, it can be covered on this show. It doesn't matter. If you go to a football game, if you go to a hockey game, if you go to a wrestling match, whatever it is, if you want to review it, you can be on this show. It doesn't, as long as you can hear it, as long as you can see it, it's on this show. The pullback, it's all about comics. Anything with comics. Now, we don't tend to do a lot of comic book movie stuff. We've done, I think, I called them, I thought this was ingenious, and it's probably just stupid. I called them comictaries, but they're actually commentaries. So we have 3 episodes where my buddy Joe and I did commentaries on TMNT 1, 2, and 3. And we probably won't do the space alien turtle, whatever those 2 movies. But it's one of those things where I've stopped creating new stuff because it's like I have Studio or I have the pull bag, or if I have this, or we do a lot of Transformer stuff. It's like, why am I going to create a new? When Steve created All Things Transformers in 2008, and I joined him at that time, at the end of 2008, going into that, we have something called All Things Transformers. So no matter what Transformers thing it is, it could go on that show because it is all. So it's, and the thing is, like, we did an episode of Geekcast Radio where we were talking about the podcast name game and making sure that your podcast name is as individual and unique and isn't copying anybody or isn't this or isn't that. Like, I can't tell you how many podcasts I've searched for with just a general geek topic in it where it's like, they're all the same. I'm like, how do you, like, which one was first and whatever one was first, that's, I don't know. But yeah, the whole podcast name game is just crazy. So I just don't do it anymore. I just use the shows that I've had for X number of years. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that name game thing bugs the bleep out of me. Mm-hmm. When James and I started World's Finest Podcast, that was the early days of podcasting. There wasn't a lot out there. There really wasn't. And so looking up shows was pretty easy. And another show started, I don't remember how long after, but after we started World's Finest Podcast, and I think they were covering a similar topic. I don't think it was exactly the same, but it was similar enough.
I remember when this happened. They were doing comics.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, they were doing. They might have actually been doing the world's finest comics
right.
that they were covering, if not other ones too. But it bugged the heck out of me because I'm like, it isn't 2022 where shows come and go, and maybe you can repurpose a name or reuse a name or whatever. It was so easy to look up and go, no, there's already a show with this name. We're going to call it something else. Yeah. So whenever anybody approaches me and says, hey, I want to start a podcast, can we put it on Earth 2? I'm like, yeah, but I tell them, check the name, really do a deep dive through iTunes, Spotify, and even Google, and go past page 1 on Google. There is a page 2 on Google to make sure that, if the name has already been used, make sure that show isn't being produced anymore. And even then, try to make sure that the name is different enough. Add something else to it.
Yep.
So that people... So I don't want to step on other podcasters' toes. I mean, yeah, podcasting has become a professional thing, but there's still very much a Wild West out there. And I think we still have to be kind to each other, even if we don't interact with each other on social media or in real life. I think that's an important step. So yeah, if you're going to start a new show, just look around to see what is out there, and make sure, you can do the same topic. That's fine, but don't do the same name. That's just rude beyond belief.
Yeah. And it's so funny. We did so. I don't know how many people listening to Studio 2009 know this, but one of our historic things is our top 100 countdowns, because we remember the top 100 animated series IGN list. Okay. That's 100 pages you have to click through.
Oh God, yeah.
My buddy Kevin Optimus Solo was like, "Okay, we can do this better. We can figure and we found a way to do it in audio form that it's long form. These podcasts episodes are anywhere from 2 to 3 hours, and there's like 6 episodes for each. So we had animated series, animated films, TV shows, blah blah blah. When we got to TV shows, somewhere around 2015 or 2016, so the top 100 television shows." Boy Meets World came in at number 50. And both Steve and I were like, what? Why is it only 50? This show is much better than this. Is supposed to be way higher. What's going on? So we went and created Podcaster Meets World. Because it's originally we were going to do it Podcaster since there was 2 of us, but the whole point, it's Boy Meets World. So Podcaster Meets World. We created that show in 2016, and it was always going to be a limited show because there were only, at that time in 2016, obviously Boy Meets World had been done for years at that point. There's only like 193 episodes of that television show. And then Girl Meets World happened, and there's like, I don't know how many, but it was supposed to be a limited run, beginning, middle, end point show. Well, now in 2022, and it is what it is, they're the stars, whatever. Danielle Fishel, Will Friedle, Mr. Batman himself, Mr. Batman Beyond himself, because he was Eric Matthews, and Ryder Strong have created Pod Meets World. And I'm just like, huh? I listen to it. I love listening to it, but every once in a while, it's like, oh, man.
Yeah,
I don't know. It is what it is, and they're doing way different things than we are. We cover it season by season instead of episode by episode. Because if we covered it episode by episode, we would be here for years. So, but yeah, the name game is like you said. Do everything that Mike said about 10 minutes ago, folks. Google, iTunes, Spotify. If it's already out there, Steve found a great way to come up with titles. Episode names. So,
that's good.
Like Future Imperfect for a Star Trek podcast or whatever. Look at episode titles of television shows or whatever, especially if it's going to be a TV show podcast or, fine. Yeah. When I eventually came up with the pull bag, actually, a buddy of mine, Mike Powers, came up with originally I was going to call it the pull list. Because, you go into the comic shop, you have a list of books and whatever else. And that was taken. I was like, oh, okay, well, what else? And then Mike said, oh, the pull bag. And I was like, oh, okay, good. And then I just started marketing around that with, jump inside the pull bag today, make your greatest game to comics, and do all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, naming shows and everything like that, it's just, it's just crazy, folks. So be careful out there.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned using episodes. I mean, that's episode titles. The Edge of Forever is based on the city on the Edge of Forever from Star Trek. I mean, and Dan came up with that. We were searching for a name. He's like, how about this? And I'm like, done. That is awesome. Do it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you use social media to promote your shows?
I don't.
I didn't think you did.
Yeah. I mean, I have multiple Twitter feeds, and, my main one is on, Earth_2. And I try to keep that one about geeky stuff, but real life stuff comes in there, because it's my main feed. But, I'm not on Facebook anymore, so I'm not promoting it on there. I'm not anywhere else really. So I don't. I mean, I don't mean to give a non-answer, but I don't.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. And and it's not that you've slowed down. It's not that you've stopped. It's just that, you especially, I mean, almost 20 years, you have a loyal listener base that knows when your stuff is coming.
Right.
Or, or they pay attention enough to you on Twitter or whatever. And all these others. So, like, I think I have 330 posts on Instagram. I'm surprised I have, but like, I don't do I don't do stories. I don't do reels. I don't do this short form video content. I cannot stand it.
Yeah.
Cannot stand it. It's like, if you're going to give me a YouTube video, I don't care if it's 2 minutes long. Me personally, I have quote unquote worked like to the point where I have a 32-inch widescreen monitor, widescreen. And it doesn't rotate. So, like, I do widescreen. I don't do the portrait mode, Instagram, and don't even get me started on TikTok.
Yeah.
If people want to do that stuff, fine, great, whatever. But when it comes to social media, I curate my social media to the point where I don't see a lot of the negative stuff.
Yeah.
Am I on Facebook? Yes. Do I make posts on Facebook? Yes, absolutely I do. But most of it is for the podcast stuff or funny stuff or memories. Man, it's like, because I'm all about the nostalgia. It's like, this happened X number of years ago. Or I made a memory post on Facebook the other day where it was like, all the post said was, 13 years ago, I found it buried. I copied that. I shared that and I said, I don't remember what I found 13 years ago, but I think I lost it again. It's like, I don't do groups on Facebook. Like, when Facebook was like, groups are the new thing. Have your podcast be a group. And I'm like, nope, don't even. It's a fan page. It's a this, it's a that. It's so we can get the content out there and get it shared and get it promoted. Same thing with Twitter. I have multiple Twitter accounts, but the TFG1 Mike account is the main one that I use for me. But it's like, it's a promotional tool. And Twitter isn't what it used to be. Like, there's a thing I think it was called Super News. It's called Twubble, TW. So Twubble with Twitter. And it's with these two. It's this animatic thing of Dave and Craig. And it's talking about what the Twitter sphere is. And, you idiot, you summoned a fail. It's this video from long ass time ago. And it's like, I miss old Twitter because current Twitter is just... Even if the billionaire buys it, it's still whack.
Right, yeah.
All right. What is your favorite topic to discuss on a podcast?
I mean, probably comic books, honestly. Movies are great. TV shows are great. I don't want to, it's like 1 and 1A. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I would definitely say comic books are like up there for me. Just because it's the medium I've been interested in
for the longest time.
Yeah,
my whole
even
life. Yeah,
I mean, I was watching TV definitely before I could read anything, let alone comic books. But that's the one I've been invested in the most, even though I've dipped in and out of comics. I've definitely had down periods in them where I've read very little or possibly even nothing for long stretches. Yeah, just talking about comics to me is just like super fun. But like I said, it's 1 and 1A with movies. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you see the differences between podcasting versus the radio? Now, I don't think you've ever been on the radio. I know you said you wanted to be at one point or another, but like, I guess this is more of a listener question. What are the differences to you?
The way it's produced, that there is a crew that's doing a radio show, there's the usually unheard producer in the booth, listening in, the commercial breaks, the need to, it's one thing to say, hey, we're going to talk about, the Wild Wild West today. And, Ian, Dave, and myself sit down and talk about the Wild Wild West. It's another thing to go, okay, I have a 3-hour block. And I know for the first 22 minutes, we're going to talk about this, and we're going to get listener calls. Then we're going to cut to a commercial. Then we're going to do this for the next 15 minutes. And like to plan it out like that is impressive, but dear God, I couldn't do that. Because if I'm on a topic and I want to talk about that topic, I want to talk about that topic. I don't want to go, oh, we only have set amount of time. And like I said, I love radio. It's still, if the opportunity presented itself to be a radio presenter, I'd be nervous as hell, but I'd give it a go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just can't do that kind of planning, at all.
I mean, I've done planning for podcasts. Like I said earlier, when we're talking about the name game and Podcaster Meets World, initially I had that planned out to be over 70 episodes because we were going to do episode by episode. And then Steve was like, nah, I don't want to do that. I was like, okay, I'll come up with something else. And that's how we came up with seasons, and we do seasons, and we actually split the seasons. So we do 2 episodes per season. So it's like Boy Meets World season 4 has 24 episodes, so part 1 will be episode 1 to 12 of season 4, and part 2 will be episode 13 to 24 of season 4, kind of thing. But yeah, some of the planning with all that is just crazy, and you're right, the ad breaks and all that. And I try not to do too many ad breaks. I figure with 30 questions, you can half it like I already did in this episode, and then, once you get to the end, it's like, okay, we're going to take another quick break, and people can, like, most of my podcast recordings take anywhere, depending on what it is, take anywhere from 45 minutes to over 2 hours. And it's like, okay, I know we all need to take a break at some point, and that's fine. That's why I build in the breaks.
Right. Yeah. And that's the great thing about when like something like Bigger on the Inside of the Edge of Forever or even World's Finest Podcast is because I use clips from the episodes, like to segment. Like here we're talking about this episode, and then boom, here's an audio clip before you get to the next. Those audio clips allow you to go, oh God, I need a pee break right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because we're not young people anymore, and pee breaks are more frequent.
Yeah. And I will say, ever since recently, over the last year or so, ever since I upgraded Zencastr now has once you start the recording, it has a pause function now. It never used to have a pause function on Zencastr Classic. So it's like, okay, instead of sitting here and me going to the bathroom and Mike having to twiddle his thumbs or, quote the Golden Girls until I come back, it's like, oh, I can hit this pause button and no, I don't have to edit any. I can still do the timestamp of, okay, this needs to be edited at this point, but I don't have to edit out to the point of, oh, this is just Mike twiddling his thumbs kind of thing. That's awesome, interesting. Mm-hmm. I know you've done some things, but if you've done any interviews with famous people, which ones were your favorites?
No, I've really not done any that I could. Yeah, I that was a goal in the early days of the show. I had I'm not patting myself on the back here, but I had some pretty high contacts at Marvel at the time. that would have allowed me to turn Earth2.net the show into a partial interview show, but it's not something I've ever really done. Yeah.
Well, I know you guys have gotten panels like the DC, one of the DC animated one. I don't know.
Well,
I remember
those weren't me doing that's just me putting my recording device on the chair next to me at a convention, and what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of going rogue.
Yoink.
Yeah, just stealing their content, because that was before, people. Like, again, we'll say like a Wizard World Chicago or a C2E2. C2E2 is a little different because it's been around like 10 plus years now. So they came in with social medias, but they weren't putting their content up there, you know? So I didn't feel bad about recording it and putting it out into the ether for others to hear, because they were doing it themselves. And the people who can't go to the cons want to hear what's there and not just read a story about, oh, so-and-so said this about a book that's coming up or this role in this thing. But now, if they're not live streaming it, I should say, they're putting up, kind of beefy clips of the important moments that happened at the con, So that's what I was sort of doing there. That was the philosophy behind that.
Yeah, one of the things I've started doing this year on Geekcast Radio is to, like, if I have friends that are going to, like, my buddy Chris out in Portland, Oregon, he and his friends have gone and done stuff at like Emerald City or Rose City, or an interview I got to do a couple of times with comic writer Pat Shand. He is a native New Yorker and he went to NYCC. So I will get people, oh, you're going to this? Can you do that? Like, do you mind, reporting back your experience kind of thing? And we've been very lucky at the Geekcast Radio now. We have gotten some, I don't even know how, we've gotten so many voice actors and so many, like, it's not even that I had high contacts. It's just like, oh, you either ask the person directly or you get a subscription to IMDb Pro and contact their agent or manager or whomever. And, you can only do that for, subscriptions only last so long because you can only pay for it for so long. But it's like, oh, free trial? Yes, please. And I will look up as many people as I want. And we've done so many cool things. And here's hoping one of these days I can get somebody for you that you're just like, oh my God, I need to talk to them. All right. Was there ever a moment when you were completely done with it? You just wanted nothing to do with it. You went into a cave and you're like, nope, no more content.
Almost. Okay. When Des and I were covering DC's Countdown series, we got halfway through the 52 issues. And, we were doing the 4 issues at a time per episode, and we were spending 3-4+ hours per show on those. And we would start recording midnight Central Time, 10 o'clock for Des, because he's on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And so we were recording for me up to like 4 something in the morning. And I was younger, so I had the energy for it. It didn't matter. Yep. And my job allowed me to, I was maybe starting at 10, 11 or noon. I got to make my own schedule because I was the manager. So it didn't matter if I was going to bed at 5, 6 in the morning because I didn't have to get up. So whatever. The point is, we got through at the halfway point of that series and we hopped on to record, and we both were like, we're done with this, just independent of each other. We decided we were done with the series because it was making us hate comics and it was making us hate podcasting. So even though I kept podcasting from there was a very deep resentment towards podcasting and comics because of that series. And instead of sticking with it just because we had started it, because I can't say this of all podcasters, but I know this for a lot of them, there's an OCD element. I started it, I have to finish. There's plenty of off ramps and you don't take it or you don't even see it. But that one, we saw it and we took it as fast as we flipping could because it was legit making us hate, even just talking to each other. It was making us hate that, and we didn't want that. So even though I continued podcasting, that was a moment where I'm like, whoa, I am done. But thankfully And we did return to finish that out as a special to the fans, but it was years later before we did it all in one go. And we were like, I think we actually did over a couple of recordings and I spliced them together, but we did it as like one episode 999 of Earth 2 at the show. And so, yeah, but that was a big moment for us where it could have ended. And I will say, I did consider ending the show at episode 500. I forgot about that until just now. Because that's a good beefy number, 500. And some people at the forums, there's sort of a moderator section that's just for the mods and the podcasters. We're like, if you cancel the show, what's the point of earth2.net?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh God, I never saw it that way because I'm looking at it from the inside, where even though they're also on the inside, they were outside enough that they could say that to me and know I'd be receptive to it. So yeah, that was another moment where I was just like, and it wasn't like I was tired of podcasting. It was just like, to use the phrase I used a moment ago, it was an off ramp, 500 episodes. Yeah. So because to me, if like the show were to ever end, pardon me there, if the show were to ever end, I kind of needed to end on a number that's round or 5 or something like that. It just can't be randomly episode 1712. Well, why that? You know what I mean? Like, why is that the last one? But, I still had the energy to do it because I'm well past 500, double past 500, But yeah, I forgot about that. That was a moment where I just was like, yeah. And I still would have kept podcasting, doing other shows, but that's where the shows was going to end.
Yeah, and that's the thing with us at the GCRN. It was like, okay, we're going to create shows that have an endpoint, and we're going to have shows that go on or have the ability to go on forever, no matter what. Like Geekcast Radio, I say this in every episode of whatever show it is. Whenever I talk about Geekcast Radio, GCR is our all-encompassing. It was when we did like, let's break down the 80 years of Batman, or let's talk about TMNT 1, 2, and 3 as a franchise, or the Turtles franchise in general for the last almost 40 years, or Transform. It's like, that's the big show. That's the show. And that's kind of where I'm like, we're at we just released episode 307, but it's like, that's for the larger thing. And there are other shows where it's like, we can do this here, we can do that there, or whatever, but we still have this main thing. And especially with Earth2.net, I don't know if you're ever going to have an endpoint to it, but it's I don't want to say your catch-all, but it is your comic book and you have there are some episodes where you're just doing the introduction and the closing and somebody else has said, hey, like, I don't want to say it's a segment show. It's not really it is and it isn't kind of thing. And if I'm speaking out of turn here, please let me know. But it's just one of those things where, as a listener of that show, I've realized that, after almost 1,130 episodes or so, I think you're at like 1128 or 1120, I don't remember, kind of thing. It's like, there's so much here and so many varying things and so many varying opinions. It's not just Mike Sims, it's everybody that you have worked with, whether you're currently working with them or whether you worked with them in the past, kind of thing. And it's like we've already said, it's a record of your life. It's a record of nearly, almost 18, almost 20 years of your life. And that's the way it should be. You may have been somewhere when you were recording, and I think, because I didn't have a chance to go back to listen, because I'm sorry. I will say this because I don't think we use them, but GoDaddy, you suck. Like, I went back to look at episode 87 because I swear to God, episode 87 was the pen rant. I always remember your pen, and I don't remember why. I think it was something about like somebody stealing your pen or taking your pen or borrowing your pen and not returning it or something. And I have a huge issue with that myself. So I really resonated with that. So it's like, I remembered all this stuff and I remember all these things. It's like episode 100 was Turtles. Episode 200 was this, 300. And it's like you made it, every episode is special, but you make all those milestone episodes really special because you want to, like you were saying earlier, not only get the new listeners, but get the ones that have been with you for so long to, they're finally getting to this, or, they're doing this, or, and it's just one of those things where unless unless something happens to me and I'm no longer here, I will probably be podcasting until I get throat cancer or something. Heaven forbid that ever happen. But until I lose the sound of my voice, I will never not be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's what I enjoy and it's what I do, and it's just overall it's fun for me. Are there stresses? Are there things? Yes, but at the end of the day, if you put out a really great product and you're really happy with it and you really like it and you do the best you can for your guest, like interviews now, it's like, oh my god, like when I think I mentioned this to you over on the pullback when we did your comic origins. When we got to interview Maurice LaMarche, I edited that thing so fast and something happened and we broke news about him being the voice of Mr. Freeze in Arkham City. We weren't supposed to do that. And it's like, I ask everybody now, it's like, do you want anything cut out? Do you want me to, before I even start the editing, is there anything you've said in the last X number of time that you don't want in there? Blah, 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 blah. And I will send everybody because for us, we have certain things with the service we use that we have to put in. That's why I build in ad breaks, so that way I can put in what I have to put in for the thing that we use, the service that we use. And it's one of those things where it's like, oh, okay, we're going to do this. But I still think that whatever episode I've done with that person, I will send them the original file that does not have, obviously I build in my own, like, look, I've done advertising for podcasts that I don't even think reciprocate it, and that's fine. That's their show if they choose to do this. But for me, it's like, oh, I've worked with you or I've done this with you. Make an ad for your show or your network, and I will put it in almost every show that I produce because I feel like that's my way of paying that person back, for the time that they took to be on my show.
Yeah.
So before we take the last two questions, tell me the story of Earth2.net, the show, episode 1000, because for those that don't know, Earth2.net show, episode 1000, is the only podcast, to my knowledge, in existence that is 24 hours long. You nut! What did you do?
Okay, just so there's a little context, it's a series of segments. So it's not, we didn't sit there for 24 hours and record, though I would absolutely love to try that at some point. No idea how that would work, but
I'll help you do it.
Yeah. What it came down to was that was something I had wanted to do for a long time. I just thought it would be really cool to do an episode that was 24 hours long. I don't know when that idea got into my head, but it was ages and ages ago, possibly even pre-episode 100, that I was like, yeah, let's try this. But there was no feasible way to make it happen, And then when, episode 1000 was in the works, and we spent years figuring out what episode 1000 was going to be. And ultimately, I wanted to celebrate team-ups and crossovers, because to me, that's what Earth2.net and Earth2.net, the show specifically, is. It's a bunch of people coming together to produce that show. That show isn't just me. Yeah, I'm the one, who takes the raw files and does the editing for the most part. Now when people send in their segments, I don't edit them. That's not a thing I do. But you know what I mean? Like if I'm part of the talking head segment, I'm doing that. So, but the show isn't just me. As I said earlier, I'm not a fan of myself doing solo shows. So, I wanted to celebrate that. So that's why we did that one. So I said, send in all these segments of talking about crossovers and team ups and comics, in music, I don't know if I can't remember if there's a wrestling segment in there, but wrestling if someone wanted to, in movies, whatever it was. And so when all the segments came in and I pieced it together, I was sitting there going, oh, wait, this is getting close to 24 hours. Wait a minute. And I started getting really giddy inside, because the plan, even though I wanted a 24-hour episode for ages, there was no plan to make 1000 a 24-hour episode. It just happened. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to happen. It's going to happen. Oh my gosh, it's happening. And then I got past the 24-hour mark and I was like, oh, it happened. So now the behind the scenes part of it, that's even more behind the scenes, is it came out on my 40th birthday.
Yep.
So I didn't sleep that night because I stayed up. I legit started putting the episode together, and then recording the intro and all that. I'll say, I don't know, let's say like 11 o'clock that night or something like that. Like, we're done with dinner, Shayna's off to bed. I can really focus on this. But I chose to stay up that night because, when Audacity is compressing the file down from its Audacity-ness to an MP3, it's usually pretty quick, but a 24-hour show is going to take a while. And I did
at 697.8 MB. Yeah, that takes a while.
Yeah, and so I didn't want it to stall out and me not realize it.
Yeah,
so I legit stayed up to whatever time I started, finished putting all the segments together. So let's say I was done putting everything in order in Audacity, in the multi-track form at let's say 12:30, right? Let's say I was done with that. And I started the compression process or the export process. It didn't finish until I want to say 5, 6, maybe even 7 in the morning. So now it's into my 40th birthday. And that's how I spent the night leading into my 40th birthday. And then I had taken the day off of work. So I just slept that day, and I don't even know what time I got up, but that's kind of how that all came about. But then the people, again, the mods and the co-producers of the show said, look, you just can't put this out there as one thing. So I also released it as episode 1000A, 1000B, or I think it was 1000.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it's 1000.0708. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you wanted to just hear the Metallica segment, well, here's the Metallica segment. If you just wanted to hear the Crisis on Infinite Earth segment, here's that. So that's why it exists in its full 24-hour form, but also it's broken down into X mini parts form.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's just amazing. It really, really is. And like you said, you and Ian are doing AEW stuff.
Yeah.
How did you switch from with your wrestling enjoyment from WWE to AEW and all that? What was your off switch for switching to the other company?
So I have in and out periods with wrestling, a kid of the 80s. Of course I was watching, the Mega Powers Explode and the Ultimate Warrior. And then wrestling got into the 90s and it just wasn't for me anymore. No shade on anybody who likes WWF's new generation, but Doink the Clown and all that. I know Doink has his fans. And again, I'm not shitting on Doink, but it's that kind of stuff just wasn't for me. Then I came back into wrestling. I really hate to say it, but it was news of Owen Hart's in-ring death that brought me back to wrestling. And my girlfriend at the time, she was into wrestling too. So as a kid, so we got back into it. And then in 2000, and so when I say wrestling, I mean specifically WWF. I was never a big WCW kid. Back in the mid to late 90s when the NWO came around, my coworkers at Best Buy, that's all they talked about it. I could tell you the moment the NWO happened, because the next day, even though I wasn't watching WCW or even wrestling at that point, that was all they could talk about. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I get back in it would have been 99, I believe. And around 2004, I started going to independent shows for IWA Mid-South.
Okay.
And I stuck with them for a good long time, still watching WWE now because I dropped the F at that point, became the WWE. And then I got into UFC. I got into mixed martial arts. And I sort of had this mental break where if I could see someone get taken down with one really stiff punch in a mixed martial arts fight, it became harder for me to believe someone could take 7 chair shots to the head and still get up. So I kind of started to fade away from wrestling. And then I won't name check a specific wrestler, but there was a very specific wrestler that as a real person, I think is a gigantic bag of, I'll censor myself here. And because he was the champion at the time, I'm this product isn't for me. It's just not for me. And I got out of wrestling again. Then I started hearing about this thing called NXT, which for those of you that don't know is WWE's. It's their third brand. It's their
developmental program.
Yeah, it's their developmental program. And this is back when it was just on the WWE network, before it had even been brought to TV. And I'm like, oh, I really like this. And it allowed me to pay attention to WWE, because at the time that was all there was on TV, right?
Yeah.
Or TV adjacent in terms of streaming products. So, but I didn't have to pay attention to what was going on Raw or SmackDown for 3 hours. It was just, I think, an hour-long show. So I get into that, and then I hear about this thing called AEW. And it was going to feature wrestlers that I hadn't seen on the independent scene, but I had heard of. Your Kenny Omegas, your Young Bucks, guys like that. And then they were also bringing in guys like a Dustin Runnels, former Gold Dust for you old 90s wrestling fans, who I have a deep respect for, and some other people that I kind of knew tangentially, and I thought I'd give it a go. Now, I don't watch it on a weekly basis, but I keep up with it through the podcasts I mentioned earlier, such as Cultaholic and What Culture. So even if I don't see an episode or a string of episodes, I do know what's going on in one way or another. And then when Ian and I are going to do an episode, I definitely will cram a few episodes in of Dynamite and Rampage in beforehand, because generally we're talking about like maybe an upcoming pay-per-view or something like that. So yeah, sorry, it's not just a very straightforward answer.
No, that's cool.
How I kind of got there. And now I just don't pay attention to WWE at all. I mean, again, through those podcasts I mentioned, I do hear what's going on in there, but I might watch a segment or two or a match or two. WWE, as of this recording, had a pay-per-view or a premium live event, as they're now called, maybe a month or so ago, called Clash at the Castle, where Sheamus and Gunther, used to go by the name Walter, just beat the ever-loving poop out of each other. Like, legit, their chests were red. They were raw. And it was it's a 5-star match. And I'm like, but based on Dave Meltzer, if you give him any sort of credence, it is like an amazing, it's just two big guys beating the crud out of each other. And it's like, that's wrestling. Yeah. So I will watch those kinds of matches from time to time. But I pretty much stay away from WWE, and with AEW, I'll even there just kind of just watch the matches I'm interested in, or I'll give one or two where I'm like, oh, I kind of like that guy. Let me see, what he can do or what they can do, because I love female wrestling too. So I shouldn't just focus on the guys there. So yeah, like I said, it's a long, winding answer to a simple question, but that's the way I had to kind of answer that.
Yeah, I've always, like you said, and I'm not trying to turn this podcast approach into a wrestling episode, folks, but it's just the way the conversation's going. It's like, when I was a kid, I remember seeing like Roddy Piper. Like, I went to a Roddy Piper and Junkyard Dog show, or I went to this and I went to that, and my dad, and I watched it over the years. And obviously everyone, I don't care who you are, if you've seen at least one wrestling match and you've heard Mean Gene, like, I mean, come on, everybody loves Mean Gene.
Right.
And, I got into it, I get out of it, I get into it, I get out of it, and I get into it, and we created a show called Mayhem Mics, and we went for, 36, 37 episodes of that podcast, and it was WWE like 2015 to 2017, whatever that era was, and during that era, I found The Shield. And I liked Roman, I liked Seth, but I absolutely, after he kind of fixed and changed his, I loved Dean. I thought Dean was great. And then, Dean's gone. The character of Dean Ambrose is gone because John left, and when he showed up on AEW, I'm like, ooh. Like, it's kind of like when you follow a comic creator, you follow like Kyle Higgins. I mentioned that on your comic episode. Like, Kyle Higgins did New 52 Nightwing, and I'm like, okay, you've got me hooked. What else are you going to do? He's done creator-owned stuff like Cowl. He's currently doing creator-owned stuff with Radiant Black that he created with his team. So it's like, I'll follow a person or a this or a that. I don't necessarily follow the promotions. And I have not paid any attention to it in a long time. It's been years. It's not that I don't hate it. I don't dislike it. I just... It's one of those things where something has to happen in either WWE or AEW that is like, oh my, and it can't be just, oh, Chris Jericho's taking over, because don't get me wrong, I like Jericho, he's all right, but it has to be like, oh, Stone Cold is like, for me to get back into any, I don't care where it is, WWE, AEW, somebody says Stone Cold's coming back, I stand at attention. Like, yes, sir. How can I help? Mm-hmm. How can I watch this and pay attention? Kind of thing. So, yeah.
Well, again, I don't mean to make this a wrestling podcast.
Yeah, I know.
But did you see this year's WrestleMania?
No.
Stone Cold had a match.
Oh my God! Yeah. I'll have to find that on YouTube.
Everybody, we knew he was having a match, because it's Stone Cold. You're not going to just bring him out as a surprise. You're going to advertise that to get the extra eyes on your pay-per-view,
absolutely.
Right?
Yep.
And so everybody was like, well, he's had a broken neck since like 1995 or 94 or something. And that's why he retired. Like Stone Cold really, if you think about it, did not wrestle that long, at least under the Stone Cold Steve Austin persona for that long. And then when he wound down, you can kind of go, he was having fewer and fewer matches. But anyways, it's like, well, what can he do? So a lot of people thought it was just going to be like a punch and brawl kind of match, because that's kind of what his matches were. But Kevin Owens brought him out. They were saying they were going to do like an interview segment in the ring. And he just sits there and he goes, Steve, I didn't bring you out here to do an interview. I actually brought you out here because I want to fight you. And Austin is like, okay, let's go. And they have like, I want to say like maybe like a 12-minute match. And it's like good. And I'm not a Stone Cold fan. I've never been a big Stone Cold guy. I mean, I appreciate it. And I love the pop, the glass shatters. Yeah, Stone Cold.
Yep.
He was never a big fan of his overall, but even I was excited for it. One more wrestling thing, only because you had mentioned the Shield. So I had mentioned IWA Mid-South.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being a fan, sitting there in the crowd at the Highland or the Hammond Center. I forget which Indiana town it is. I always get those two confused. Where IWA would hold a lot of their shows, and it was only like a 45-minute drive from where I was living, so it was an easy thing to do. But I remember being a fan, sitting there, often front row in this little rec center thing, and they would have like the quote unquote nosebleed seats, the tickets that cost like $10, off in the corner. There was a young guy that would sit there all the time, and he was striking because he was like a young emo kid, right? He was like maybe like 17, 18 years old, had his long black hair.
Right.
That kid was Tyler Black, is Seth Rollins.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I remember being at IWA shows with, and I'm not going to use his real name because I think it can be kind of rude to use a wrestler's real name without permission. But before he was wrestling, he was just a fan sitting in the crowds. And then I went to his show, an IWA show. I don't remember if it was Ohio or Iowa, but I would travel around, do road trips with him. And I remember sitting in the crowd, and it was one of his earliest matches. I'm not going to say it was first. It definitely wasn't. I've looked it up on cagematch.com. Or is it cagematch.net? Whatever, Cage Match. And it's one of his earliest matches. And I'm sitting there, and there's a lady next to me cheering someone in the ring by their real name. Again, I'm not going to say it. I'm going, no one is named that in the ring. And it turned out it was like his mom or his aunt or something. Right. And after the match, he came over and like gave her a hug because he was so proud. It's one of his earliest matches. And I remember going, that's the kid from the bleachers. In the Highland shows, like, holy crap. And then when he got to WWE and, even though I wasn't watching at the time, became a part of the Shield, I was like, good on him. And then when he did the quote unquote heist of the century at WrestleMania, I think 31, where he won there was the match between Brock and Roman where he cashed in his Money in the Bank. I saw that. I didn't watch it live. I watched it afterwards. And I was like, I still get goosebumps watching that because here's this kid who wins WWE's top belt. I say kid, here's this guy who wins WWE's top belt that used to be that kid sitting in the stand. It's like when you hear interviews with Edge or Christian or Colt Cabana, and they're like, oh yeah, I was at this WrestleMania and you can see me in the crowd holding up this sign. That is so cool to me. So anyways, I'm off my wrestling. The soapbox goes back.
No, man, it's awesome. Like I wish that I understand why the Shield isn't a thing anymore, and they've all each individually gone on to do their own stuff. But like, that was so obviously Stone Cold and Jericho and everything that happened there and all that, whatever. Like, all that. Fine, whatever, 2002, 2003, 2000. But once the Shield came in, I was like, oh, again, I'm paying attention. What are you doing? What are you this? What are you that? And it's just, what I find interesting is I found that with Boom Studios, they have several different WWE comics, and the comics kind of go through, like, the beginning of the original WWE ongoing was like WrestleMania 2015 or 2016. I was like, oh, and watching a comic book version of WrestleMania, it's like, oh, I don't need all the extra stuff that they throw in there to get you to. It's like, oh, this is just a nice linear story. That's great. That's awesome. So fun.
Because again, just pulling the soapbox out just a little. Recently, this was maybe within the last month or so, maybe the last 6 weeks, over on AEW, Dean Ambrose, now Jon Moxley, did, during a match, he did Seth Rollins' curb stomp on an opponent. And then, then on the next Raw, Seth, I don't remember what he did because, again, I didn't see it. I just heard someone mention it. But he either did one of Dean/John's moves or he directly referenced him without saying his name, with an indirect reference. But I think he did a move. I think it might have been like the paradigm shift or the rear naked choke that John does. But it's cool having these two major wrestling companies on TV again because these people traveled the roads together. They work together. So and they're friends. They're best friends. They're brothers. So like to see them reference each other across programming is really fun and really cool. So if you're a Shield fan, you should keep an eye out for that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the podcast earlier, and I looked it up on Spotify as we were talking. I'm like, oh, Jon Moxley returns. And I'm like, oh, I'll add that to my list because in Spotify they have your episodes or whatever it's called, and it's like, oh, okay, I'll add that and I'll listen to that later.
Yeah.
All right, getting back to podcasting, last two questions. What advice do you have for new and or veteran podcasters in the art of podcasting?
Don't take yourself seriously. I mean, take podcasting seriously, but just you're having fun. You know, like even if you're doing a serious show, you're still having fun. You're putting entertainment out for someone. You know, call it content if you want, but you're putting a piece of entertainment out there. So just enjoy what you're doing. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, it's going to come across. So why are you doing it? Don't do it. If you know, don't stop podcasting, but change topics or refocus the show. Do something. But yeah, take the medium seriously, but don't take yourself seriously.
Yeah.
I personally, can I cuss a little?
Yeah.
Okay. When I talk about podcasting, I refer to myself as just an asshole with a microphone because I'm like, you know, that's all I am. I'm just some dude with a mic who just is going to talk about whatever I want to talk about, you know? And so that's sort of my philosophy is, you know, take the medium seriously, show it a lot of respect because it needs a lot of respect. It's still the early days of this thing. You know, podcasting has legit only been around for about 20 years. At least under the name podcasting. You know, people have had, you know, online radio shows and, you know, all that for a long time. But the form itself has only been around for about 20 years. So respect it, but don't put your head up your ass about it.
Yeah, I think like if we want to, outside of when you started Earth2.net, the website in 2004, and then Earth2.net, the show started in 2005. I think it was right after. It's whatever Apple event happened in 2005, and Steve was like, iPod, podcasting, blah, blah. You know, whenever Steve Jobs announced the whole podcasting thing in 2005. So, yeah, it's around 20 years or so, and, you know, you're talking about don't put too many, you know, those, you know, inside jokes or that, and you know, you're talking about, oh, I'm just an asshole with a mic, and I talk all the time. I'm like, but we've only talked twice in 14 years. How can you be an asshole with me when we've only talked in 2 episodes? Like, you know, it's like I always take the microphone thing. Like I actually, you remember Nick Arcade, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Remember Mikey, the little kid in the board game thing in the video game?
Vaguely.
Okay, so it's just this. It was their way of, you know, playing for the contestants in the live action portion to play the animated version of, you know, oh, okay, this is, you know, Mikey's going to move this many spaces kind of thing. It's kind of like Mr. Monopoly or whatever. So I've always wanted to create a character, and Steve just shakes his head and doesn't agree with me. He's like, no, don't. We're not doing that. No. I'm going to wear him down eventually, where I want somebody to create for me a Mikey the Microphone. And essentially it's a caricature of me, but it's basically just this. Think of, God, this is one way I can get Gilbert, may the man rest in peace, Gilbert Gottfried. Think of Clippy, but as a microphone and less annoying. Oh man, but you're right. Always have fun with it. Take what you're talking, like you said. Take the topics seriously, but just have fun and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
All right. So question 30 really isn't a question, but it is. Where can the people find your shows?
Earth2.net. Earth-2.net is the main hub for all my podcasts, but they're on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, whatever they're calling themselves now. Also on Spotify. That's really it. I mean, when I can remember to do it, I link out to them on my Twitter feed, which I already name checked, but I'll do again, Earth_2. Only reason it's an underscore and not a dash is because you can't do dashes in Twitter handles, which annoys me. Because it's hard to cross-brand that way, but I'll live with it, he says through gritted teeth. But yeah, Earth-2.net, Earth2.net, and Twitter, and Apple Podcasts, and Spotify.
Awesome. Yes. All right, folks, this has been a blast. As always, dream come true for me, because like I said, I've listened to this guy since 2007, so... hell, I've fallen asleep to the sound of your voice, not just because I was like, oh my God, I'm so tired. But we're talking about Batman the Animated Series. Wake up, you fool. All right, folks, we're going to take one more quick break, come back to close with the outro after this.
Do you know John Hyatt songs?
Maybe you know them from being covered by Roseanne Cash, Three Dog Night, the Neville Brothers, Emmylou Harris, Eric Clapton, B.B. King, Jeff Healey, Bonnie Raitt, or literally hundreds of others.
Maybe you have some of his albums on your shelf, or in your cow-horned Cadillac right now.
I'm Jesse Jackson.
And I'm Sylvan Groff.
And we're going to dive in from A to Z. Join us on the Perfectly Good podcast.
We're going to discuss all of your favorites and uncover some forgotten gems, from Aces Up Your Sleeve to Zero House.
Rate and debate every John Hyatt song on the Perfectly Good podcast. Have a little faith. For over 6 years, my guest and I have been discussing the soundtracks to our lives. I'm Jesse Jackson, and I've had hundreds of fans from around the world share their stories about the power and magic of all kinds of music. If you enjoy stories about joy, redemption, trials, and ultimately triumph, then please check out Set Listing Bruce, a Bruce Springsteen fan podcast. Remember, there is magic in the night.
Do you like retro cartoons? Then Saturday Morning Rewind is the podcast for you. Join them each month as they talk about classic cartoons and interview legendary voice actors like Jim Cummings.
I am the terror that flaps in the night.
Corey Burton.
Sometimes things can be so funny.
Rob Paulson.
Sure, Dwayne, but how are we going to find chaps our size?
Nancy Cartwright and many more.
Eat my shorts.
So grab a bowl of Lucky Charms.
They're magically delicious.
Put on your hammer pants. Go to SaturdayMorningRewind.com. And be prepared to feel like a kid again. Once again, that's SaturdayMorningRewind.com. Saturday Morning Rewind was voted Best Podcast Ever by its host, Tim Nidell. So it's gotta be good.
Next.
All right, folks, we are back here inside Studio 2009. This is, and I did not plan this, because usually when I create a podcast approach, I was like every 5 episodes. So episode 5, episode 10, episode 15, episode whatever. Well, it turns out this is episode 52.
Nice.
Yeah, this all comes back to comics. So, Mike, is there anything else you want to say about podcasting? Anything else you want to say about how you do it or how you enjoy it, or just anything else you want to say before I run through our closing?
I think I'll just say that,
earlier or just a few moments ago, I was saying, respect the form, respect the medium. I just really love podcasts because it has opened the door for so many people just to put their ideas out in the world, whether they recorded one episode or they've been doing it for however many years and however many episodes, it doesn't matter. I just really love the form. So, if you out there have been thinking about starting a podcast, just do it. Go to Target, go to Best Buy, order something off Amazon, get a cheap little mic. Don't invest in a lot of expensive equipment from the jump, because if you don't like it, you don't want to have invested a couple of $100, right, in this. So yeah, get a little mic, get some headphones, and just go, be it yourself, get some friends in the room, some people online, and just talk and see how it goes. And even if you don't put that out in the world, consider that, your beta episode, your episode 0, the thing you just tried. And if you like it, keep going, because for me, like a lot of the stuff that I've recorded is because I wanted to hear that content. I don't consider myself at all the end all be all authority on the DCAU, on Star Trek, on Doctor Who. Hell, I came into Doctor Who as a noob. That was the thrust of Bigger on the Inside, is Dan's the longtime fan of the classic series. I started watching the new one. So he got to be the, what's the word I'm looking for?
He's the veteran. You're the probie. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the thrust of that show. But I wanted to hear a Doctor Who show. And I'm like, with that kind of theme. So that's what we did. So if there's something out there, if you feel like, no one's talking about, I don't know, a particular TV show that you really like, and for some reason there's no podcast about it, start it, do it, try it, put it out there, and also listen to feedback, but don't let it get under your skin, because
don't overthink it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, definitely listen to legit critiques, but there's so many bad actors out there that if someone's just being a jerk, they might just be being a jerk. So if you get some bad feedback, consider it for half a second and then just move on with your life. Don't take it too hard, at all. And then if they become a persistent problem, just block them. Social media has blocks. You can block someone's email account. There's ways not to hear those voices that are getting under your skin. So yeah, just have fun doing it. Again, respect the form, but have fun doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as long as I can make the recording experience for anyone I have on any of my shows enjoyable, then I eventually go and spend 11 hours or whatever it is editing it to make it sound the best I can make it sound. It's like, okay, at the end of the day, I am happy with this product and I hope people enjoy it. I used to, the negative iTunes reviews back in the day, I used to flip out and get so just bent out of shit. And now it's like, I check it every now and then, but I don't because nobody's really leaving reviews on because iTunes is kind of gone. I mean, it's still there, but it's, no one really leaves. And I noticed Spotify started, would you like to leave a star rating for a show? And I'm like, oh, okay. But they don't actually give you would you like to leave a review for this show? It's like, oh, okay. You just want the star rating for the algorithms and all that BS and whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, folks, go check out earth2.net. Earth dash the number 2 on I did that right. .net. I'm losing my mind, folks. I'm just losing my mind. It's like I said, I'm trying my best not to fan out here because it just, like I said earlier, I've listened to this guy for so many years. It's like, it's nice to actually sit down and talk with him because it's so fun. It was one of the things when I started, I was like, okay, Mike and James did World's Finest Podcast and they covered all the DCAU. I need to at least wait a year before I can, or whatever it is. It's like, fine. And that's how I started TFG1 Podcast. I'm like, okay, I'll do what they did, but I'll do it with Transformers and I'll find blah, 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 whatever else. So, all right, folks, for us here inside Studio 2009, that's going to do it. And I'm going to run through the closing. I have no idea what's coming up next. I really don't. Last episode, Steve and I did a double feature where we talked about the Atom Project and Six Underground, which are both on Netflix. They're both Ryan Reynolds vehicles, and that was fun. And the Atom Project, oh man, I've never been the biggest fan of Ryan Reynolds. I've always thought, oh, Van Wilder, okay, great. Kind of thing, but man, the Atom Project is so fun. If you like Back to the Future, you'll like the Atom Project. So, yeah, and coming up next, I don't know, it's going to be something. No clue. So thank you for joining us here inside the studio. If you'd like to get in contact with us to leave feedback for the show, there are several ways to do so. Visit the website, geekcastradio.com, where you can listen to and comment on all of our content. Send us email to feedback@geekcastradio.com. You can check us out on any podcasting platform you prefer. I prefer Spotify. It's just an easy UI for me to use. Follow us on Twitter at Geekcast Radio for the network, at ITS Studio 2009, all one word for the show. I am at TFG and Mike. Mike is at Earth_2. And don't you have Mike Reads Comics too?
Yes, I forgot. I also have Mike Reads Comics, all one word, no underscores or anything like that. I just tweet out about the comics I'm reading at that moment.
Absolutely. Become a fan on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/Geekcast Radio Network. You can check out Studio 2009 podcast over there as well. For now, I am TFG and Mike with
Michael Sims.
You'll hear us back in the studio soon.
Yeah.
The voice kept calling me Bruce. In my mind, that's not what I call myself.
What do you call yourself? Oh, yeah. I suppose you would. But that's my name now.
Tell that to my subconscious.